Next, we'll move into our monthly budget report. Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, are you ready? This is informational. You ready to present?
Yes, Chair, ready to present. So good morning, everyone, or still morning. Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones. This is the monthly budget report for the month of April 2021. The Utah State Board of Education remains fiscally sound and able to meet all of its obligations and commitments for the remainder of the fiscal year. We're entering into what is the fourth quarter of state fiscal year 21, the month of April. So April, May, and June are left. What we'll have on top of this or coming up is our closure procedures for state fiscal year 21. That's an intense process that involves, a lot of action and activity on the part of our awesome financial staff. While at the same time, in tomorrow's meeting with Finance Committee, we'll be starting the process of approving your state fiscal year 22, your approval of the state fiscal year 22 budget. So I encourage all board members to take a look at that agenda item in the Finance Committee because it's, again, quite extensive, as you all know. How much billions of dollars are our budget for public education. So again, for this month and for the remainder of the fiscal year, we are financially sound and capable of meeting all of our obligations and commitments. With that, I'll pause. As you know, it's we go into quite an amount of detail by section each month. I don't necessarily go through each one of the sections. I look for any concerns or questions from any of the board members. So Chair, if it's okay at this time, I'll take any questions on the monthly budget report. And if there are none, we'll move into the discretionary funds report.
Board members, do you have any questions of Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones on the budget report that's been in our packet? I'm not seeing any hands raised, so will you move to the next information item on the discretionary funds report? You're muted.
If we could pull up the discretionary funds report, please. Orienting board members to the upper right-hand corner, you can see that we've obligated or committed what was the initial balances across the state funds, general funds, FML's federal mineral lease and land exchange funds. And what we have is remaining balances within those. As you go towards the left of the report, you can see the projects that are currently underway or have been completed or on within the process of completion. The reason why I just wanted to provide a little bit more detailed information on this, it'll be in your June meeting. That we respectfully come in front of you and ensure that we still want to pursue these particular projects, or that we get also we also get the we start the process of identifying what other projects we might take in the or go with when the carry forward balances. So Chair, I'll pause at this time to see if there's any questions or comments on the discretionary funds report.
Questions or comments from board members on the discretionary funds report? I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Okay. Okay, Chair. Then at this time, would you please recognize Sarah Young for the report on the CARES funding, CARES Act money?
Director Young, are you ready to handle 6.3 here?
I am, Chair. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, board members. I'm Sarah Young, our Director of Strategic Initiatives. I'm here today to present an update on our COVID-19 relief funding for K-12. So when we started this agenda item, our original award was through the CARES Act, but since then we've received subsequent awards and so have broadened that umbrella to now be an update on all of the COVID-19 relief funding for the state of Utah K-12. So as I mentioned before, there has been multiple acts of legislation as well as awards that have come through both the U.S. Department of Education as well as our state legislature in regards to implementing solutions and mitigation of COVID-19 in our K-12 system. As a part of that, we are going to address them kind of chronologically in regards to each of the individual funds. This is necessary due to some of the action items that are coming later to be able to be very specific and differentiate some of the different awards, specifically because they have different timelines by which they have to be spent. So the first one that we'll be touching on is the CARES and CRF Award. I will note that for Esr I and Gear 1 and all of the funds received through CARES, those must be spent by September 30th, 2022 in regards to expenditures from our office for support. This table provides you an update on where we are as of March 24th, 2021, in terms of the original CARES as well as Coronavirus Relief Funds or CRF awards that are highlighted in green. You can see that our community continues to make progress in regards to submitting items for reimbursement for all of these different awards, and that we continue to see the amount reimbursed to the field increasing as we reach the end of the school year. As far as round two, this would have been the legislation that was passed late December 2020, the Coronavirus Supplemental and Support Act. This is where we find our Esr II and Gear 2 funds, and that those must be spent by September 30th of 2023, so 1 year further than the original Esr awards. It is important to note that LEAs are not able to end or request reimbursement, for their Esr II awards prior to having reimbursed all of their Esr I funds. This is also going to be the case for Esr III. So from a reimbursement standpoint, we have them use their oldest award first before they gain access to the newer awards that have the extended timeline. This is a practice that we use at the office that allows us to help the LEAs make sure that they're utilizing the full amount they've been awarded, as well as making sure that we're not returning money to the federal government unless it's absolutely necessary. As far as the Esr II Logistics, this is an update we've been providing for the past several months. This is going to be the program that was released in the second phase in February of 2021. We do have an established state base so that every LEA receives at least $84,777 or more, depending on their Title 1A distribution. And it was due to our office last Wednesday, so March 31st, 2021. We do like to note, because this is true not just of Esr II, but has been part of our communication to the field, and we want to be consistent with our messaging to our board members as well, that in addition to looking at needs as they exist in K-12 education, the primary lens through which the use cases and reimbursements and projects are viewed for the Esr II fund is really taking action to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on students and families who really depend on our schools. So whenever we're going to be discussing later some of the opportunities for the state reserve in both Esr I and Esr II, this is the primary lens, is looking at some of the impacts on the greater community in regards to COVID-19 with the data sets that we have, and then using those data sets to bring you possible projects and steps we can take as an agency to be able to mitigate some of those challenges through a statewide coordinated effort. This question is something that we've also been using in a lot of our technical support and trainings that we've been providing to the field. A lot of times the initial question that we get from our LEAs as they start to consider how to use this money is, what can I spend it on? And so to try and shift that language, we encourage them to consider, how can I use this funding to demonstrate what would happen if we increased investment in education? So not necessarily looking at it through the lens of a shopping list of things that we can buy, but instead, where can we invest as a local community as well as a state community to demonstrate the effectiveness of practices in terms of meeting the needs of students and schools, so that we do have a data set around using those best practices to inform future efforts here within the state using our local resources as well. So the Esr II timeline, like I said, concluded last week. We are following up with a couple of LEAs. We had 6 that did not meet that deadline, and staff is proactively reaching out and working with them to be able to confirm either an LEA's intent to waive, or if they just needed additional technical support to be able to get those plans in. As far as additional awards that will be coming through this second award from the federal government as well, we still have Gear 2 that is still being discussed at the governor's office level in terms of what that specific use case will be related to K-16 needs. We don't have any action on that at this time, but do know that your staff are engaged in those conversations to help provide input about needs as they arise within the community. Additionally, we have the Emergency Assistance for Non-Public Schools. Again, this is the program that we're coordinating locally. We have started to receive applications from our non-public schools requesting reimbursement, which is the first round. That application is going to be open through the end of April, and then we will begin round 2, which is looking at future needs, services, and reimbursements. That information, just so you know, is available on our website. We appreciate anyone, not just our staff, but as well our board members, that if you have contacts at non-public schools, this is a very unique program. It's not necessarily something where, as an SEA, we've been engaged in this type of a process directly with our non-public schools before. So directing them to our website so that they can learn more, and as well, you can direct them to myself as staff who's working on this program. Round 3, so this is the most recent. It was passed in March of 2021, the American Relief Plan Act. And this also issued a new round of ESSER funds, as well as a second round of the Emergency Assistance for Non-Public Schools. It is expected that these funds must be spent by September 30th, 2024. As a part of this, this legislation and funding is in progress within our office. Where the total amount that was awarded to the national field was over $122 billion to K-12 education agencies. And there are some very specific actions that are required related to the awards that are different from our previous ESSER awards that I'm going to take a moment to highlight. So as far as the award in Utah, the total award for ESR III is a little over $615 million. So as a reminder, part of this ESSER, or Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Fund, is that 90% of that is direct funded using a federal required formula of Title I schools direct to our LEAs that serve those Title I schools and students. So you'll see for this particular round, that's over $550 million. In addition to that, the 10% that is set aside for the state reserve also has additional criteria that is part of the federal legislation that is a new step for us as an agency. We will be required to spend 5% of that state reserve to address learning loss. So that'll be over $30 million that'll be used to target specific projects in the learning loss arena. We'll be required to spend 1% on evidence-based summer enrichment programs and an additional 1% on comprehensive after-school programs as well. So about over $6 million for each of those. We've started putting together community conversations, especially with the Utah After School Network and some of our interagency leaders in the after school and summer learning space, to be able to have conversations about what are our goals and outcomes for these funds, so that we can then create the logistics infrastructure to be able to achieve that. As far as the money that is going direct to our Utah LEAs, a couple of additional changes to highlight for you as well. Each of our LEAs in the ESR III or ESR ARP application will be required to spend 20% of their award to address learning loss at the local level. And you'll note that learning loss is more than just academics. It is social and emotional as well, as defined by the federal legislation. In addition to that, they did call out a new allowable use case. So you might remember the 15 different use cases that have been highlighted in previous LEA plans. There's a new one specific to being able to implement policies and actions in coherence with the CDC's reopening the and operating schools guidelines. Finally, there is a requirement both at the LEA level as well as at the state level for a maintenance of equity. And this is where we are required to prevent state and local funding being cut disproportionately from high poverty districts and schools. So this basically means that if we are looking at changing and having to reduce budgets, either at the state level or the local level, we have to maintain the access to resources equitably across the state, as opposed to it directly targeting these high poverty districts and schools to be eligible for this award. As far as the timeline goes, we have received our grant award notification letter. The Department of Education has decided to send out 2/3 of that award upfront. The remaining third will have to be applied for. That application is not available yet, but your staff are actively working on preparing for that application with some of the webinars and information that's been provided through the U.S. Department of Education thus far. Once we complete that total application, we will then also begin work towards being able to have that award appropriated by our Utah legislature. So that is something we will be asking for in special session, so that we as an agency can then move forward to being able to meet some of the state legislative language requirements in SB 3 of providing a spend report to the Legislative Fiscal Analyst's Office as well as GOMB. Moving the applications out to the field, which I'll highlight our timeline for that momentarily, and then ultimately approving those awards. Our draft timeline right now for ESR 3, and I will say it is a draft, we continue to get feedback from leadership in the community, is our agency's intent is to release the application and guidance documents and allocations by June 15th, 2021. Additionally, moving forward with applications due to USBE from our LEAs on August 20th, 2021 as well. As part of that process, we are also engaging in technical support, such as hosting a session at Utah Rural Schools Conference in July to be able to support our administrators in that setting with the creation of these plans and considering all the diverse needs that are out there. As a part of,
Dr. Young?
Yes.
Are you at a point you could take a question? It might be on either this slide or your previous slide or not.
Of course, I'm happy to.
Okay. Board Member Lear?
Yes, thank you. And thanks for interrupting, because I was afraid I might lose the thread of the discussion if I waited too long. But I noticed the new allowance, or the new, I can't remember what you called it, the new use. The new explicit allowable use case. Because we've seen the benefit of increased sanitation, and I won't even get into the mask wearing kind of issue, but the greater air filtration efforts and sanitation, would an LEA be able to use this this funding to continue that or improve their air filtering capacity in different maybe buildings or facilities? Would that be an appropriate use of that?
Chair, if I may. Thank you. So thank you, Board Member Lear. So there is actually a very explicit allowable use case around the improvement of HVAC and air ventilation related to the mitigation of the virus. That is also included in the opportunities as described by the federal government as an allowable use case for this ESR ARP or ESR 3 fund. I will note that it was also an allowable use case related to ESR 2 But that was kind of the space where we had our state legislature provide some of that reverse match language during the general session, so that ultimately if our LEAs chose to spend in that capacity with these federal dollars, as they're allowed to do, that they would repercussion related to a reduction of their state education dollars. So we will not have clarity on if any of those state level guidance will exist until the passing and appropriation of this fund in special session. So the answer is yes, as of now, but we have to wait for that to know for certainty.
Just a brief follow-up, Chair, please. Do you know, Sarah, what is the legislature's concern about these HVAC air filtration systems that I saw in another area where it was specifically excluded from some use of some funds? What's the problem with that, so that maybe LEAs that want to use it could maybe talk to their legislators?
So I can't speak to their specific intent and their concerns. What I will say is that from my perspective of the conversation, there's a very intensive focus on wanting to make sure that these funds go to support student level learning needs. And that I think that potentially, whether through this, the language at the state level or through other conversations that are happening, that we just want to be very, very clear that that is a priority. We're in line with the federal government in the fact that they've introduced that 20% of the funds have to be used to address learning loss. But that would have to be my inference about maybe why some of those other items were ultimately moved into a reverse match category.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Director Young, please continue. Oh, hang on. Board Member Earl.
Yes, thank you. I realized I was putting up the hand clap instead of raise my hand, because I kept thinking, where does that keep going? So anyways, I have two questions. So the maintenance of equity that's addressed here, in essence, where we already have our budget already done from the legislature, this really doesn't impact us, right? We're not going to be cutting funds. Is that accurate in saying that? So that element doesn't really play out in Utah. It may in other states where they may have to be cutting funding because of impacts, but financially that doesn't really impact us here. Is that an accurate statement, or are you seeing areas where that could still be impacted?
Director Young.
Thank you. So it's a great question. So you are very correct that we are in a very positive space as an educational state and system here in Utah, as compared to a lot of our, sister states across the nation who are facing, fiscal deficits, and that they're trying to figure out where to do that. As far as the maintenance of equity goes, this is one where we partner with our leaders over at GOMB. But at this point in our early conversations with that, we do not have a specific concern that Utah will not be able to meet those criteria at this time.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that, because anyways, I won't go any further in that. But my other question has to do with our after school programs and summer programs. Who and maybe this is something offline I can talk to staff about, but specifically, I'm just thinking, does this fall under education law, or do these organizations come in? Do they have their own agendas or their own philosophies that they can be teaching in these after school programs? Or what's the requirements for those where they're after school? Does it still meet the requirements of the standards and the different components of Utah education law?
Director Young.
No, that's a great question, and it's one where I don't have an answer for you here today. What I will say is that as far as process goes, right now we are really just early in terms of engaging in what are our goals of this effort. I share that because when we talk about the after-school programs as well as the summer enrichment programs, many of those are already in partnership with a local LEA. Some may not be as well, and so I think think that there would be a difference there in regards to what that programming looks like. As we move forward with a clearer goal set that we can design then an application around, I'll have more answers for you in terms of, is it possible that this award could go to a non-LEA? And then what would the requirements be around that? We generally approach all of our subawards and grants of this nature with a set of assurances that do require that the use of the funds not only meet the federal requirements, but also our state requirements as well. So I can get you more information in regards to what those requirements are outside of this grant program after this meeting. I'm just going to put you in contact with some of our other after school and policy staff.
Okay, thank you. And I have had dialogue with them before. I was just wondering if there was more specifics that we knew. Thank you.
So Director Young, we have that kind of that flow chart. I have a question and then it gets answered, and then it can be the question and the answer can be shared to the whole board. If we could follow that on Board Member Earl's question, I think we'd all benefit. So thank you. But I'm not seeing any hands raised, so please continue.
Of course, thank you. So we do want to just take a moment to highlight that this American Relief Plan Act does also include broadband resources that are available to our K-12 community and yet won't be administered by the Utah State Board of Education. Because we've been involved in the broadband space in terms of supporting our students, our schools, and our LEAs with resources, I just wanted to bring this to your attention as well. There are two new programs and sets of resources that are being distributed through this effort. The first is the Emergency Connectivity Fund. So that is about using an existing E-rate program to provide home internet access and connected devices through schools and libraries. Our partners at the Utah Education and Telehealth Network oversee the E-rate program for the state of Utah. And so they will be working directly with our schools and our libraries in terms of being able to provide opportunities for expanded resources in those areas. In addition to that, there is also a new program about the emergency broadband benefit. This is one that's going directly through our individual providers, where a provider can, who's participating in the program, can reduce the cost of the total internet service by up to $50 per month, up to $75 per month reduced for households on tribal lands, and potentially providing up to $100 towards a computer from those providers that choose to participate. You'll note that there are eligibility requirements that are embedded within this, such as receiving free or reduced school lunch or experiencing a loss of income due to COVID. These are efforts where we are partnering with other state agencies, including the Governor's Office of Economic Development, the Utah State Libraries, and our partners at UETN to make sure that we are collectively as a state using a single message related to this program, so that when an individual family may hear about the emergency broadband benefit at their library, that we have the same message coming from our schools so that they know that it's the same program and opportunity.
Director Young, we have a board member with a question or comment. Is this a good pause moment? Okay, thank you. Board member Cannon.
Thank you very much. Sarah, I'm very interested in how COVID has highlighted our need to be able to connect with students and how important it is. What I'm wondering is if we have some kind of a state inventory that lets us know how well connected our K-12 schools are with broadband. And then my second question deals with San Juan's Wi-Fi, because we've heard that they've just had a big investment to bring Wi-Fi there. I'm wondering how much of their need has been taken care of. Did this connect all schools or all kids, or is it just a partial fix? So those are my two questions.
Director Young.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Board Member Cannon, for these questions. In terms of your first question around the inventory, so the Utah State Board of Education is a leader for the State Digital Teaching and Learning Program, or DTL. And as a part of that particular program, we partner with the Utah Education Telehealth Network on those solutions that are in schools related to those efforts. I share that because one of the pieces that our UETN partners are charged with is doing a statewide inventory related to the digital devices and opportunities. Currently, those requests and kind of efforts for gathering that data have been focused on technology in the schools. So how many devices, what types of devices, what solutions and software programs are being used. We are currently working with them because they are getting ready to do their next inventory ask of the greater field. And we staff are working with them to expand to ask questions about home internet access. Prior to this effort, as a state, we have not gathered that information, but it does seem to be very important and clearly relevant now in a post-COVID response space. So that is something where they usually do their survey in September, and we'll have additional information at that time related to the current state of the community for K-12 home internet access.
Okay, do you have information right now in terms of school access in Utah?
So the school access is something that's provided through our partners at UEN. And they actually have a great wealth of resources in terms of kind of demonstrating not just the network backbone, but also then the access points that exist at every single school. So because we as a state have been invested in that space through the great leadership of UEN for so long, we are very much at the head of the pack in terms of having our schools connected. What we found is that when we went to remote learning in March of 2020, that school connection wasn't enough to be able to address remote learning needs at the household level when our kids were outside of there. And so I'm happy to provide you that information and kind of those resources related to the previous digital inventories and the current state of internet in our school buildings.
Thank you. I see that point and see how you would need to have the home aspect as well. But I would love to have some numbers around how many schools in Utah do have that connected ability. Thank you. And then my other question was about San Juan Wi-Fi.
Yes. So as far as the San Juan component goes, so the majority of their build was really specific to reaching students on the Navajo Nation. And so recognizing that San Juan is a larger district, they do have local providers that are available in the Blanding and Bluff area, Monticello. So this was really, their project was focused on being able to provide services to students where there was no private provider available, and really working with the Navajo Nation leadership to be able to provide that expanded access. As far as the access looks right now, and in working with the San Juan leadership, they've been able to service about 500 households. That is not every single household. And a lot of the reasons for certain pockets not being able to be addressed usually has to do with the radio technology requires that a signal is bounced from a visual radio tower and antenna to other points. In very specific cases where we're not able to access households, it's usually for one of two reasons. One is that there is no clear line of sight to be able to reach that household without establishing additional radio towers, which brings us to the second challenge. Those radio towers are often built on households that may not have power, and yet the technology requires power. And so because of that, there are still areas that the team in San Juan are actively working on, but it is not a comprehensive solution to all households due to those two factors of line of sight as well as power access.
So you said that they're currently reaching about 500. Do you have a concept of how many are yet to be brought on online. And I understand the issues you're talking about, the lack of power and the line of sight, but do we know how big the problem is and how much of the problem we've addressed by addressing 500 connections?
Yes, so as far as the services go, it's over 90% of the households, ultimately when all 500 are brought on in regards to what that looks like. And I will personally note that having worked closely with the really innovative leaders of San Juan School District's technology and district staff who have made this happen, that they account for every single household that has a student. And so on their map, when they're looking at how are we building out this infrastructure and what are our solutions, they have every single student household accounted for. So I will tell you that the effort is not out of lack of resources or lack of interest. It's really just coming down to some of these technical issues. And it's something that they've noted, and they're really looking for additional solutions to be able to address.
Sarah, thank you so much. It just tickles me to think that 90% of those patrons are able to get service. And if you consider you're dealing with households who have no power, can you just imagine how much the world is opening up to those students who are now being able to get internet? So thank you so much for answering my questions.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. And Dr. Young, maybe you can speak to because I've had some after the report, maybe it was our last month's report, people ask me about providing internet to the homes, and if I have the story right, they're not, or what San Juan's doing, they're providing access, but not the full internet. They're not Netflix, and so this connection that these students are having is an education connection, which is really, really valuable right now while they're in a lockdown situation, that they have that access. Can you speak to that?
Yes, sure, you're exactly right. So what's happening right now is that they are broadcasting out the school network to these individual households. So I'm going to try and get the quote right. They're basically bringing the classroom to them in terms of the amount of access and the programming that each of these households has. So because they are being able to gain access through the school network, it is going to have the exact same filtering and requirements that we hold true for all of our in-school access points and networks. That's what they're able to access at the household level. The key point of that is to really give these households an opportunity to be able to connect with their teachers, not just through Canvas, but also through some video conferencing technology. And that's the primary use case that is being created in this situation.
Thank you. We've got another hand raised. Board Member Earl, and I believe Board Member Cannon, your hand's still raised. I didn't know if you wanted to stay up or not.
Sorry, so just a quick question. Well, maybe I can ask, I'll ask our tech people. So I just wondered if it was associated with the Rachel device or if it's associated with something else. I'll just ask our tech people though. I'll write that down. Thank you.
Director Young, please continue.
Okay, so I just have a couple more slides as part of our update, and then we'll move to the action items. So as far as the Utah coronavirus stimulus summary, this is a visual that was created by the Governor's Office of Management and Budget for the state of Utah. And we've been sharing this as well with our community members and with you here today, just to really highlight that the efforts and the funding that is being provided to K-12 education is really part of a much broader landscape of supports that are available to the community in regards to response to COVID-19. So I share this because it really speaks to the fact that there's so much going on in K-12, but there's a lot going on statewide as well to be able to support our individual families and households beyond just the funding that's coming through the K-12 system. In addition to that, and really to a point that was made earlier by Board Member Earl, we also like to note that as a state, we are unique in the fact that many of our sister states are facing fiscal deficits, and that in our space we are not, thanks to the really thoughtful planning of our state leaders. And so due to the fact that, as you know from the previous session, that we've seen increases in our overall funding, that really creates a unique opportunity here in Utah to make sure that we are not just using these federal funds to be able to fill gaps, but instead that we're truly targeting them to meet the needs of our community, focused on responding to COVID-19. So that's definitely a message that we're sharing with the larger community, and wanted to, again, just share it with you as well. When we talk to our community leaders, we focus on key questions. These are just a few, asking them to consider when they're thinking about developing their plan, what are the impacts of COVID-19 on our students, teachers, and schools? What data do we have to inform those impacts, looking at data sets from prior to the pandemic, comparing them to now, and using that to inform next steps? 3, what have we already spent our early COVID-19 response on thus far? Has that been helpful? Looking at being able to use those lessons learned to inform next steps. And then looking forward, what is our plan for schools in the future? So noting that many of our schools really started to bring in innovative solutions, such as blended and remote learning opportunities that may not have existed before. What are their plans for being able to continue to offer options that are being requested by the community, and how these funds can be used to support that? So with that, that is the end of my update, and then we have a couple items for action.
Okay, let me see if there's any questions with the presentation. I'm not seeing any hands raised at this time. Okay.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to bring up our documents related to the 3 action items. So just as a kind of history, so as we have been working through the administration of these funds, and very early on, we bring these action items related to the use cases of the State Reserve to the State Board of Education for your authorization. This is based on wanting your guidance and authority related to authorizing our individual use cases for the State Reserve, to make sure it's in alignment with the strategic plan and other offerings through this agency. So the first item that we have for you is action on approving the remaining State Reserve from Esr I. So the request is specific to being able to provide personalized summertime for teachers in our targeted school or support and improvement schools, to really address individual student needs due to COVID-19. And I'm going to turn it over to our Director of School improvement here in just a moment to be able to speak to that. I do want to note in your backup, we have provided you a visual of where the Esr I state set aside has gone thus far, noting that many of those authorizations occurred last year and that we have new board members with us here today from those times. So you will note that we have highlighted the use of the total of 6.7 million in change in terms of breaking it down by use case, the amount, and when it was authorized by an action by the State Board of Education. When you scroll to the end, you will see that we have $678,286.91 left. We are rapidly approaching our 1 year from award date from the U.S. Department of Education. And so we will need to obligate these funds, or we will risk returning them to the federal government at the award date, which is May 5th. So with that, I will turn it over to Tracy, if you're with us.
So do we have Director Vanderbilt?
Yeah, this is Tracy Vandeventer, Director of the USBE Center for Continuous School Improvement. And if I may, Chair, I'd like to speak to this proposal.
Okay, yes, please.
Very good. Just to give you a little background, this is focused on those schools that are targeted support and improvement. And an easy way to think of that is, as we look at our state, we rank our schools from high to low, and then the lowest 5% of those schools are identified as a comprehensive CSI school. And within each school, we have student groups. If there are 10 or more students, then those student groups are considered like a school within a school. And as you look at those schools across the state of Utah that have been identified as TSI, or Targeted Support and Improvement schools, we have 71% of our schools that fall in 2 student group categories. That's our students with disabilities and our English language learner students, our multilingual learners. And what's been difficult during this COVID time is that those 2 groups of students have been, I think, extraordinarily impacted above and beyond. Of course, it's a tough time for everyone, but just the access, the need for additional support, you know, the lack of broadband access, even within the school building, you know, there are limitations with small group support, and all of that has made it so that it's even more difficult to provide some of the additional support that these students might need. So with the remaining amount of money that we have, what we would like to do is provide a planning time during the summer where teacher teams of up to 8 teachers will come to look at their data for their school, specifically for that student group, either students with disabilities or our English language learners. And then those teams will look specifically at the indicator points that their school received, because they've been identified as a targeted support and improvement because either their students with disabilities or their English language learner groups have performed below the lowest 5% of all schools across the state. So we recognize that those student groups were struggling even before COVID came to town. So with that in mind, we know that teachers have been doing their best. They've been providing such great instruction, but it's been difficult to really finely tune the instructional supports for these student groups in order to help those students increase in their proficiency skills. So we are proposing that these teams, up to 380 of these teams of teachers, will come and they will look specifically at the data related to those student groups. How did those student groups, those students in those groups do with their growth? How did they do with their achievement points, for instance? How did they do with the lowest 25% of those students in their increase? Those are all indicators that give them an overall number of points. What our hope is that they will come in the summer, they will spend 6 hours of time coming up with a very specific plan to help elevate the proficiency level of those students in that student group the upcoming year. So these funds will pay for those teachers to receive a stipend for 6 hours of planning time, $200 each. And also it will allow their team to receive, we're looking at John Hattie's book, Visible Learning, and having that as a tool to help them identify a strategy, specific strategies to help those student groups. Now, part of the application process for a school to be able to apply to get these funds and be able to receive the payment for their participation in the planning is that the LEA must make a commitment to match those funds by having 3 additional 2-hour sessions throughout the year. And those will typically fall around the end of each term, but it will give that team a chance to measure progress towards the identified plan that they've written in this summer. That could be an after-school session and that they would receive a stipend, or it could be that the LEA commits to having substitutes available so that those teachers could participate in the training during the day. Altogether, though, that would allow us to have 380 teams of teachers that will focus on these 2 student groups and come up with a plan. And we know that teachers want these students to be successful. And it's been tough because with COVID and with the changes in the ways that we've been providing instruction. There hasn't been quite as much flexibility in being able to come up with that planning time, because a lot of the work we've been doing has been on making sure kids are safe, making sure our classrooms are engaged, making sure that our students are doing the work that they need to do without some of that fine-tuned planning that needs to happen. So this allows us to step back into that focused review of the data and coming up with a very specific plan. I'd be happy to receive questions.
Thank you, Director Benaventer. We have three hands raised. Hopefully I got them in the right order here. Board Member Cannon.
Thank you, Chair. Tracy, I note that this is focused towards TSI schools, and TSI is a federal designation, as I remember. I'm wondering if this money also will go to our schools who have been identified for turnaround on a state basis. Will they also get this funding?
That's a great question. There are many schools who have been identified as a state turnaround, but also have some TSI student groups within their school. And in that case, they would absolutely be eligible. We're going to be focusing on those 2 student groups first, because it's such a large percentage of those student groups that we have across the state, and hoping that those schools will participate. If we still have others that want to participate and all the slots have not been filled, we will look at the remaining student groups and give those schools an opportunity as well if they've been identified as a TSI school.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Board Member Earl.
Yeah, mine's just a quick comment. I appreciate the fact that this is a localized decision on how they'll proceed with the direction they want to go. They're going to look at their data, their information. They're going to look at their programming that they're using. And then I appreciate bringing in the idea of best practices and letting them choose what that is. If I'm understanding you right, is that correct?
Absolutely, that's correct. And recently, in the last 6 months, there's been an increase in questions on how did our students get identified again? What are those accountability indicators? Mm-hmm. So there's a little fuzziness on the part of the buildings and the LEA about exactly where each of their schools landed on each of those indicators. So there's some education that will happen there. And for instance, one high school I worked with recently, they had received quite a number of points in areas, but the one that they received the lowest amount of point was their achievement points. They received a half of a point out of a possible 56 points. So just even becoming aware of that helped them shift some of the support for those students that fall within that group. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Board Member Straight.
Yes, thank you. I see that Board Member Booth has his hand up. I was going to ask to do a motion, but I will hold off on that until he has a chance to speak.
Okay, Member Booth.
Tracy, I was wondering, the application process, so you need to process 380 applications between now and May 5th. Is that what Sarah was saying, that the money had to be obligated by then?
We will definitely be out there rounding up the troops as fast as we can. And I believe that we will be allowed to obligate those funds for up to 380 schools, as well as getting the books, the materials that we know that each team will want. But we will continue to have that application process open, because some schools will choose to have their meeting closer to the return of school in August. So I don't believe we have to have those meetings, but that we will be working on those applications and bringing those schools in and getting them to commit.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, Member Straight.
May I make a motion?
Yeah, so accept the motion.
I move that the board approve the authorization of $678,286.91 from the Esr Ii State Reserve to support resources and programming for targeted support and improvement TSI schools to address needs exacerbated by COVID-19.
Do we have a second?
Board Member Booth.
Okay, we have a motion second. Member Straight, you want to speak to your motion?
Just briefly, I appreciate the questions that have come before, and I love that this is targeted and directed towards helping students make the improvement. So thank you.
Okay. Discussion to the motion. I'm not seeing any hands raised. I'll restate the motion, and the motion is the board authorized $678,286.91 from the Esr I State Reserve to support resources and programming for targeted support and improvements to TSI schools to address needs exacerbated by COVID-19. Board members, at this time, please vote. Voting is complete and the voting is unanimous. Is that how you see it, Vice Chair Belknap?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. Motion passed unanimously. Director Young, please continue on the second proposed action that you wanted to brief us.
Thank you. So this second proposed action is specific to asking for authorization related to a portion of the Esr II State Administrative Fund. This would be to create a multi-year but time-limited CARES educational specialist position. So as part of your backup, you will see that I have included the specialist position description that goes through the principal duties. This is a primary need due to the fact that we have received this third award related to the administration of over $615 million. And we just want to make sure that our team is from a capacity and turnaround standpoint to be able to administer the funds. In addition, because we are asking for a lump sum, and I know I was unclear in a previous request for administrative funds, on the second page, we have created a compensation breakdown, which demonstrates the annual salary or hourly rate year by year, as well as the benefits and the indirect costs that lead us to the total amount that we have requested for authorization. So this is not a total salary request, but instead is a request to be able to offer the position through the full amount of time that the funds are authorized for.
Okay. We've got questions from board members. Board member Earl.
Yeah, my question is, do you think this is going to be difficult to fill where it's only a 2.5-year position? And will we be able to get the kind of specialized person we need to follow through on this? I'm just wondering if there's some apprehension, do you know what I mean? If we might be limiting because that, which we don't want to extend a position unless we need it, right?
Definitely. So, I will, oh, pardon me, Chair, may I answer?
Yes, please, Director
Thank
Ann.
you, Chair. My apologies. So Board Member Earl, we had issued a previous position that was similar earlier last year for the CARES Administrative Secretary position. We actually had over 80 applicants, and that was a similar time-limited position. We had multiple individuals interview who were stellar, who we wished we could offer jobs to throughout the agency. So based on that previous effort, I'm confident that we will be able to secure the appropriate personnel to lead out on this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. At this time, board members, I would seek a motion, or I could say it like this. As the chair, I'm seeking a motion to authorize $331,162 from the Esr II State Administration Fund for the creation of a multi-year time-limited CARES education specialist position. That is the motion I'm seeking.
So moved, Chair Belknap.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. That was a second, board member Straight.
Do that to Mr. Hanson.
Oh, okay. All right. We have a motion and second. Discussion to the motion. Seeing none, I'll restate the motion and then we'll vote. The motion before the board is that the board authorize $331,162 from the Esr II State Administration Fund for the creation of a multi-year time-limited CARES education specialist position. Board members at this time, please vote. Voting is complete. The motion passes. I believe there was 2 no votes. Is that what you saw, Vice Chair Belknap?
Yes, Board Member Hart and Board Member Klein.
Okay, do you have that, Lorraine?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, motion passes. Director Young, please continue to the third opportunity.
Thank you. So this is the third proposal we're bringing to you this board meeting. This is asking for your consideration to authorize funds specific to the statewide K-3 letters implementation program. And I believe we have coordinator Sarah Wibke here, who, Chair, if you would allow, would be able to speak to this proposal.
Yes, please.
Yes, hello. Good afternoon. Sarah Wibke, Pre-K through 12 Literacy and Library Media Coordinator. Happy to be here. I know that you've all taken the time to read through the proposal, but just to give you a quick overview and also to address what LETTER stands for in case you're curious. LETTER stands for Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling. So it is $11.9 million request going over that 2-year span. It was chosen based on data and to address the learning disruption that we've all seen. It would include approximately 153 students, 7,000 teachers, which includes general education as well, special education teachers, 400 coaches, and 69 LEAs. The trainings that are mentioned throughout the document would be provided either virtually or in person, pending, of course, the pandemic guidelines at that time. So we'll make sure we are addressing those concerns as well. But with that, it's about a 1-year training for administrators and school psychologists, while teachers would go over a 2-year training that includes 8 different sessions and modules. It also aligns to the strategic plan and the professional learning standards as well as the required federal use cases. And I'd be happy to take any questions if you have any.
Questions or comments? Board Member Earl?
Yeah, I have a couple of, I have quite a few concerns actually with this direction. First of all, the $12 million for a 2-year program. This to me sounds like it's going to be what every school is going to be using in the state of Utah, which I know it's trying to advance the understanding of reading and literacy. But we have a lot of really, really good educators that are doing a great job in this sphere already. For 11 or almost $12 million, it would seem that allowing those districts, kind of like we did on our first item that we voted on today, to decide how and what they were going to use those resources for in this area, to me would seem a more or a better use of that funding. This to me says the whole state's doing one program. This is what it has to look like, and there's, I guess we've got good things going on already. This looks like a whole new program. There's a couple of other things I have concerns with. One of those is the embedded video modeling instruction and the privacy associated with that. And there's some other components to this too that I think are privacy issues to me for educators. I guess I'm wondering, maybe I have a couple of questions in this. One, is this what our districts were asking? Or was this a way to, and I realize in here it says they can choose, but at the same time, it sounds like this is intended to be for everyone in every district, for every literacy person that falls in this category. I don't know if you can give some more detail or some more specifics on things and why we didn't allow districts maybe to submit and improve upon what they're doing already.
Okay.
Answer.
Yeah, you want to take that, Sarah? We've got both Sarahs, so either Sarah could take it. So
yes, Sarah Wibke again. I'd be happy to do that. So to address some of your concerns, the specific videos that you were curious about, Board Member Earl, are embedded within the training. They're not videos that anyone is making. They were created by the creators of this training. So just so you're aware of that. And then also some of your questions around privacy. These are trainings. It's not a program. These are trainings that are meant for teachers and, of course, admin and coaches to understand the deeper knowledge of how to teach students how to read. We also wouldn't be, this would not be something that every school would be participating in. It would only be those 69-ish LEAs. So we have approximately 124 LEAs in our state in the elementary setting. And so it would be less than half of them partaking in this. And so thinking about it in that realm, it would only be required for those LEAs where their data is showing that a need is there. And so for those who are doing a great job, just like as you mentioned, obviously they would not be invited to partake in this opportunity. So I appreciate you acknowledging the great work that's going around in our state.
So
So
let me see.
Yeah, may I ask-
Let
yeah,
me
go
see if
ahead.
Dr. Dixon has more to add to that.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Hudson. Yeah, I just want to punctuate something that Sarah indicated, and that was everybody would still keep their program. So this is really about the science of reading. And as I have been talking with system leaders, both charter directors and superintendents, they're concerned about early learning. They're concerned about kind of looking at tier 2 interventions and helping their teachers understand the science behind reading. Not all of our teachers were prepared that way. We know that coaching models are really important to help teachers improve their skills. And it's something that as a board, you have discussed and promoted and supported in other venues. But I just would say that LETRS is something that is very research-based. It's working in other states where they've looked at this professional learning. So think of it as not a reading program, but a professional learning opportunity for teachers to really understand the deep science of reading. And as we look at our data, we know that we have far too many students who are not proficient in reading.
Okay, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I guess my question once again is it's almost $12 million of professional learning. I just really wonder if there's a way to disperse this money and allow them, if they choose to do this. It just feels really heavy on maybe a vendor type of a thing instead of, you know, I guess it's the dollar amount that we're using this with and for everyone. I don't know, maybe someone else can add some other clarification for it, but I have real concerns over it.
Okay. Member Hart?
Yeah, so I'm really conflicted on this. As a former reading educator, I think that it is really important to teach about the science of reading instruction, and I do think that's a need. However, there were projects that we had that weren't funded in legislation, and why are we jumping to LETRS and not looking at some of those things that we had prioritized? I guess, does this need to be decided today? Is this, at what point do we give input on how nearly 12 million is spent? I mean, obviously it goes to our strategic plan. It's important, like I said, but I am concerned that we jump to LETRS over some other programs that our schools had and that were cut. In particular, MOST is one of them. Why are we jumping to this rather than looking at other options? I'm just curious. We could, for instance, the MOST program was utilized for after-school tutoring and catching up, and that's exactly what we need more funding to do. I'm confused why we're going in the direction of LETRS automatically, and where that conversation occurred that it was a priority.
Chair,
Dr.
I'm happy to speak to the
About this-
process if that would be valuable.
What's that?
I'm happy to speak to the process if that would be
Okay,
valuable.
Speak to the process, and then Director Thronson's hands raised too to respond. Go ahead.
So it's a great question, Board Member Hart. So as part of this process, we actually reached out to the entire agency and said that we were really looking for opportunities and proposals that were based in data in regards to our response to COVID-19. And I think that looking at this specific proposal and the data that's available to us through the Acadians Reading Program really created the foundation in which we noted that there were significant needs that were exacerbated due to COVID-19. And so that's been the primary lens in which we've been asking and kind of considering proposals, is that clear relationship to a need that was due to COVID-19 and having a data set around that need to inform that. So as far as the process goes, these proposals, and we have others, are considered internally and kind of discussed and vetted in alignment with the strategic plan before we bring them to you. I will also note, again, this is not the only proposal that you will be seeing, but due to the board backup due dates, it was the only one that was ready in order to be heard and considered at this meeting. So I'm happy to provide additional information about the process. Otherwise, Chair, I'll turn it back to you for other comments by staff.
Chair,
Okay.
I have a follow-up.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Molly.
At first the first thing we talked about was the TSI schools. Then we, met the need for additional support in the state office. Now we're looking at early elementary. I'm concerned that we make sure that we're at least touching on the broad spectrum of needs. We know that graduation rates, we saw data on math, we saw data on reading. Most hits science and math, obviously. It doesn't hit early literacy. I just would like to see, I would like to make sure that we're hitting as broad of a base as possible. Letters, and my question specifically, letters is a smaller group of districts, correct? It's not every district, and this would not expand it to every district, or would it?
Okay.
Chairman.
Director Young, or should I go to Dr. Thronston?
Dr. Thronston would be best to speak to the content of the proposal.
All right.
Thank you. So for kind of bigger, broader questions, as the agency trying to streamline to really hit what are those things that are priorities for this funding. So there are 4 kind of main areas that we've really focused on: early learning, acceleration and recovery, which was where a program like MOST would fit. It's also personalized competence-based learning, kind of advancing some of those pieces around high quality instruction, customized supports for students, and then finally effective educators and leaders. This particular initiative hits on 2 of those priorities in early learning, as well as building the capacity of our educators and leaders. As the educators in this would be teachers, coaches, school psychologists, and the principals of these schools that we are seeing the need in the student learning outcomes to increase. So we're looking at 26 LEAs that were already considering doing letters on their own. This would actually give them some funding back to be able to use that for other needs that they've identified. So we have a number that were already headed this direction, and this was just a way to support more. Additionally, this really aligns with the strategic plan. We have less than 1 in 2 kids reading at grade level by the end of 3rd grade. We have a significant need in this space to really address the science of reading. We have 40% or more of our teacher population who were not trained in their teacher preparation programs to advance the science of reading with their students. And so as we kind of look at where can we invest these funds, developing our earliest learners so that they can access content later is of critical importance. So it is a significant amount of money. We also have quite a bit of money in this space. And so as we think about where can we invest, most importantly, to impact the future trajectory, where can we invest upstream to avoid the downstream pieces that we have now. Early learning is that space. So as we kind of look for our state survey data, we surveyed teachers in the elementary space a couple of years ago, and they expressed not being competent in teaching some of the most foundational skills in reading, such as phonemic awareness and phonics. And so if we can help give them that instruction to advance their practice, to bring evidence-based instructional strategies into their classrooms, to weave into the tools and curriculum that their LEAs have given them, that would be of added value. I did ask a few superintendents. Those that I asked were super excited about this opportunity. They see it as a way of advancing their teachers to improve student learning outcomes. Happy to answer any more questions, but hopefully that hits a few. And I think with the most question, there will be additional proposals. Our LEAs, we had about 40 that participated in most. With the funding that they have, it's a very appropriate use at the local level to do that if that's what they see, where they want to invest their funds to be able to advance those most opportunities that they no longer have from session. And one thing to include is that when we had passed HB 114 a couple of years ago and it got funded this year, we asked for 18 million. We got 5. 18 million was to be able to provide professional learning supports and job embedded coaching to really advance our teachers' knowledge in early literacy and numeracy. And so this is our way of kind of compensating for not getting the 18 million, but to be able to support those same initiatives that we had hoped to support our districts with and charters. So hopefully that gives you a little broader context.
Thank you.
Okay, Member Moss.
Thanks. Just a brief question. It kind of follows Member Hart. I have the same concern about requiring it and whether districts have any ability to assess and determine whether this fits into what they're already doing. Is there, and I may have overlooked it, but is there some opportunity for districts who do see the need to improve, but have another idea about an alternative program? Is there some option in this authorization to allow them to do that if they've already sort of, especially during COVID, I guess, my last part of that, I know districts are digging deep and assessing needs and what's working, what's not. It would be nice if they had some ability to exercise that control. Is that in there?
Dr. Swanson?
So it's not, it was, the proposal is to say letters is the training. We could definitely take that addition and make it an option of, we would recommend letters. And if you have another evidence-based solution that you would like to propose, that our agency could consider their solution to that. It really, when we looked at other states that have been doing this kind of implementation, Mississippi is a good example. Their learning outcomes have jumped significantly in the last few years after they trained all their teachers and principals in this work. And so just kind of replicating and learning from our other states of ways to improve. Letters has had a track record. We have school districts in our state already doing this work. Ogden, I believe, is on their 3rd cohort of supporting their teachers on letters implementation. Davis School District has a plan to do it next year. So as we're kind of looking at what our LEAs are doing, we're trying to support more directly with that. But if the board would like to say, yes, we want to support early literacy and letters is one option. And if an LEA wants to propose another option that's evidence-based and kind of meets standards, then we could definitely add that flexibility to this proposal.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Not Board Member Moss, did you have a follow-up? You're muted.
No, thank you. Sorry. I did see a little bit of mixed review on the What Works Clearinghouse, and I thought, it might be something where a district might have dug around and had another idea, but I love the idea that we're in the business of supporting them, and it sounds like this is a great offering. I would hate to bind their hands if they're, finding something else that's customized. So thank you.
Okay. Board Member Straight, your hand was, I have you on a list and then it went down and back up. I saw your hand, like maybe it was like not really flashing, but so I'll go to you, Board Member Straight.
So
and then Klein, you're on.
I'll let Natalie go first. She was before me.
Okay. Board Member Klein. and I'm not hearing you unless you're muted, or you might be, you look
Right,
close.
thank you. Oh, you me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay, so just wanted to go back to the comment that Jennifer Thronson made. Did she actually say that 40% of our teachers in their teacher training colleges, I assume, are not trained in how to teach early literacy? To me, that just blows my mind when that is the most foundational thing that we can teach our students. And if letters is so wonderful, maybe we should be recommending that to the teacher colleges to be training the teachers there. The other question I had was 300 psychologists. Maybe you can help me understand why up to 300 psychologists, it said, would need to be trained. When we're talking about training in early literacy. What did the psychologists have to do with that?
Dr. Thronston, did you handle that? And
Absolutely. I'll take the first
Sarah's
question,
got
and
her
then
hand.
if you don't mind, I'll take the first question and then hand off the school psychologist question to Leah, as I know she has some involvement in making that suggestion, if that's okay, Chair. So for the 40%, what we're talking about is as you're absolutely right, our teachers have been trained in early literacy, but the science of reading has been advanced in the last decade. And so our teachers who became teachers before 10 years ago, the science of reading is not what we know it as of today. So what they were exposed to in those prior years, before we really understood how students learn to read, is not as advanced as to what we know now and today. And that's where that 40% comes from, is the teachers who graduated prior to 10 years ago in our system that are still teaching in our elementary schools. We have about 40% that weren't trained on the science of reading.
Director Voorhees, did you want to add something there?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I did recommend that we add school psychologists to the list of those trained for two reasons. One is when a student is suspected of having a disability, one of the rule outs that a team must go through when they assess the student's present level of performance and needs are is the student receiving evidence-based instruction? And in order for a school psychologist to help a team make that determination, if we're going to provide a statewide evidence-based instruction to teachers, school psychologists also need that information to be able to help teams make good decisions about the eligibility of students with disabilities. The second reason is related, but once a student has been made eligible for special education, school psychologists collaborate with teachers, general education and special education teachers, to determine what interventions, what services and supports need to be provided to students to help the students with disabilities access and make progress in the general education curriculum. And then they also help teachers evaluate if the students with disabilities are accessing and making progress in the general curriculum. So they are critical members of the education team in supporting students with disabilities to access evidence-based instruction, to access the intervention needed when they are not making progress after receiving instruction, and then to evaluate the further intervention, different types of intervention needed, the intensity, the frequency, the duration. So the more knowledge that school psychologists have about the instruction, both the pedagogy and the content, the better able they are to support teams in supporting students with disabilities.
Is it a follow-up, or we good? Board Member Klein? Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Let's say I'm tracking order here. Board Member Straight?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As I was thinking about this and hearing all the different comments, we talked about building student capacity. That's always a focus. In my 30 years, I've never quite arrived. I continually add things to my toolbox. I'm continually building capacity, and there's so much out there, and there's so much that we need to work through and work with, such as I've read Visible Learning. It made some great impact. It gave me some strategies, some evidence-based strategies in which I could improve my abilities as a teacher. And if I improve my abilities as a teacher, that impacts student learning. And that's what it's all about. So I think this is fine. We engage our teachers, we engage our students through this process of helping teachers. Man, a lot of this stuff is, I never learned it in my teacher education, but I did learn what was at that point. But we've done so much research and we've done so much in regards to this with individuals like John Hattie and others. So anyway, I'm in support of this.
We've got a couple of hands raised. Vice Chair Davis, and then Board Member Earl, is your hand still raised for? Okay, okay. Vice Chair Davis.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering, what's the situation with Esr Ii funds? I mean, I hear they're coming. When are they coming? How much money is coming? Is this something that we could pass this today and then look at Esr Ii funds to potentially continue the MOST program as a grant program as we designed it as USBE and not push it off to the LEAs individually? Or do we not know information about how much and when Esr Ii money is coming, and would we need to look at something like maybe using a portion of this today or other options or whatever? Just wondering if someone can help us with Esr Ii information.
Director Young, can you speak to Esr Ii?
Yeah, I certainly can. So thank you. So in the previous slide presentation update, we do give a breakdown of Esr Ii in terms of the state reserve being at about $61 million. With that stated, there are, again, in Esr Ii specific guidelines the federal government has placed around the use of that state reserve, with 5% of it having to go towards addressing learning loss. So that'll be half the amount because it's 5% of the total award, being at $30 million, and then 1% required for the after school and 1% for the summer learning, which will be a little over $6 million each. So we will have additional opportunities related to what will ultimately be the remaining 2.5% within that space that could be considered for proposals. And in looking at proposals, I just think the key factor, to bring it back to, again, one of those slides, is in response to COVID-19. So really being able to tie any of our use cases related to our state response to COVID to be able to move forward with those action steps for reporting purposes as well for the U.S. Department of Education.
May I follow up, Chair?
Yes, follow up.
So I do have a question, but before that, I'll just say, so I would support that. We have heard the UEA president come 2 months in a row now asking to use these ESSER funds to preserve our MOST program because it does hit these targets, especially a lot of the learning loss from COVID and after school and summer and lowering class sizes and interventions, and that would hit our secondary students. But I think we could wait, depending on what Director Young tells us the timeline will be on the ESR III, because the early literacy is so key important as well. And every time I hear national conversations with board members from other states, they really are plinking on that key as well. Like, we need better training in reading specific strategies for our early grade teachers. So anyway, could you tell us, Director Young, what the timeline is? And if it was on the previous slide, I apologize, I have forgotten.
Not a problem. Chair, if I may.
And then after your comments, we'll go to, I think Dr. Dixon wants to reply also.
Okay. So no, thank you for the questions. So for Board Member Davis, we present a lot of information, and I totally appreciate, even sometimes as one of your staff members who's involved in all of this, there's a lot of ESRs, there's a lot of 1, 2, 3s, and so it warrants repeating as part of the conversation. So as far as ESR III goes, at this moment, we've received 2/3 of that award, and we'll need to apply for the final third. As far as bringing forward use cases, we were looking to have that process complete so that when moving forward, you as a board knew the total amount of state reserve you would have available to you related to that funding stream. So as far as the action timeline goes, we're really just waiting for the U.S. Department of Education to release that application. They noted it should be in the month of April. So we would expect to have that total value and award for you in May or June at the potential latest, in terms of being able to take action and providing direction related to the reserve that's available.
Okay, Superintendent, did you want to add?
Thank you, Chair Huntsman. Yes, I would just like to add that I reviewed the ESR II plans that we have in grants management recently, and I can see that a lot of the funds, as has been mentioned, are already targeted at the local level at tutoring and after school, before school, summer. So the bulk of the funds really are concentrated in those areas, and that's the intent of the local ESSER funds. And I will just tell you that talking to various advisory groups that I have and meeting with superintendents, they want to be very intentional about the use of their funds. And as they continue to get more funds, including ESSER III, then they're wanting to make sure that they can target those at their own data points. And that's where those local funds are going. So I just want to remind us to be thinking about what is our role. These are state set aside, and how can we leverage support for the LEAs? And they ask us to do things like provide professional learning, provide resources and tools, where they are really looking at their funds to do those targeted supports at the school level. I think if we can just reframe the intent of most and maybe not even call it most, and for those like Board Member Hart and others who used it in their schools for targeted interventions for mathematics and tutoring, great, that's an appropriate use of funds based on the data at the school level. But I worry a little bit about the message we send when we talk about a program that didn't get funded and we try to replace it with state set aside funds. As Director Young said, that's not going to fly with the feds. It won't fly with our legislature. So I just want us to be careful moving forward, to be very data driven, very targeted, and realize that the LEAs have funds coming to them where they're planning on doing the very things that you're talking about. So concentrating our efforts on what leverage do we have in terms of the way we can support with our state set aside, particularly in literacy and mathematics. And we know what the data points are and what people are telling us they need from us. So just maybe differentiating those two ways of thinking about it.
Okay. Member Earl, well, let me just, let's see. Member Norton, I've seen your hand up and back. I don't know, some people are kind of in and out. So are you okay if I go to member, I'll go to Member Norton and I'll come back to you, Member Earl.
I am just wondering if the professional development has to be tied to a specific vendor. That, I guess that's my big concern, is that we're going to, stamp letters as our flag going forward when, there's a lot of really good professional development that could come from the state that doesn't necessarily have to cost $12 million and be tied to this specific vendor. That's where I'm still stuck in thinking about taking this forward. If somebody could just talk to me about, do we have other options other than just this one program?
Board Chair, may I respond?
Yeah.
Yes, hello, Sarah Wilkie again. So As far as the specifics as to why letters was chosen, it is the one that is asked by districts more often than by a lot than any other option. The reason, and I know it is expensive, and it is only offered by one vendor, and they are it's very locked down by them. But the reason it is so expensive is because it includes multiple components. Most professional training only includes the training. This is including an online course for people to have prior to getting the in-person training. And then also a bridge to practice piece, which includes them actually working and using the knowledge that they're learning at the same time that they're learning it with students that are struggling in their classroom. So it's immediately benefiting students within their role as soon as they're getting that knowledge. Yes, it is extensive because it includes those three components, which means it's very extensive. So I hope that sort of helps to respond to why it is so expensive and why it was chosen. I have had, in addition to the 26 LEAs that Jen's mentioned that are already hoping to do this next year with potential of ESSER funds. And a lot of them aren't even districts that necessarily need to based on their data, but they're wanting to because they know it's really great. In the field, it is known as the #1 training for the science of reading specifically, probably because it's so extensive and such a deep set of knowledge. And in addition to that, I have also had 94 educators in our state just this year reach out to me and say, hey, are you going to offer letters at any time? I want letters. I heard about it from my friend who got it or whatever. And so I have had a lot of requests asking for it with our LEA stakeholders as well as educators individually on their own. So I hope that helps in deciding why it was chosen.
Did you have a follow-up, Board Member Norton? Okay. Member Earl, and then we'll go to Vice Chair Belknap. Member Earl.
Yeah, I want to make a motion if that's okay, unless Board Member Belknap has a comment to make first.
No, I was going to make a motion as well.
Okay, my motion is that the board approve the use of Esr II State Reserve to support the statewide K-3, and I'm changing this to Early Literacy Implementation Project. And I'm asking in my motion that the staff work to broaden this out so that availability of funds can be for either letters or a program they're using that they would submit to our staff and request the funding.
How am I going to put that in a motion?
Okay, so the motion that I said that, and then the direct staff to open up to other programs.
So the intent of your motion is to approve the use of the Esr II state funds to support the statewide K-3
Early Literacy Implementation Project, which could include, and it sounds like letters is probably the top choice for many districts or many people, but that's my motion.
So it's the K-3 Early Literature Implementation Project. If we put an S on the project, is that, and that's plural?
Yeah.
Or or no or yes?
Okay, sorry. What's your question?
So, but I'm just trying to help you with your motion here. So would your motion be that the board use the Esr II state reserve funds to support the statewide K through 3 early literature?
Literacy.
No,
yeah,
literacy.
Early literacy.
Yeah, literacy, sorry. Literacy implementation projects, plural?
Yeah, I think it would need to be that. So yes.
Which this would fit in there, but there could be some others.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Want to speak to your motion anymore?
Yes, I just want to, I just think, and this is probably an outstanding program. I did do a little research into it. It is out of Mississippi. It's kind of a vendor thing, and I'm sure it's outstanding. I just feel like some districts may have something they're using that is equally outstanding that they could use the funding for just as well. And I think broadening that out a little bit and allowing that usage would be appropriate.
Okay, we have a motion before the board. Discussion to the motion. Board Member Moss.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick clarifying question. To that point, that districts may have something they're using, and I think Director Thronson suggested that, you know, what we're proposing here might be open to another evidence-based program that a district might want to start using. And so I'm just asking clarification that whether the intent is that it binds them to something they're already using or another comparable program that they want to try based on evidence of success elsewhere.
My intent is either or, right? If they have something that they have already had success with, or if they want to expand that.
Okay, Superintendent Dixon, your hand's raised.
Yes, thank you. Just clarity, Board Member Earl directed staff to look at programs, and I just want to get clear.
I didn't state that in my motion, though. I kept that out of the motion and I went plural.
Okay, but just for clarity's sake, when we keep using the word program, there's a reading program that LEAs use, and this is professional learning. So I just want to make sure that we're not talking about, I want to make sure people don't have the understanding that we're talking about LEAs can come and ask for funding for a reading program, because that's different than what this action is stating. So by opening it up to projects, we're talking about professional learning projects to support the science of reading. Am I accurate? Just want to make sure.
Yes, in the areas that there may be, I'm just saying we may already have that available, or districts may have something they want to use separate from letters that is equally beneficial for educators.
As a
professional learning literacy project, not a reading program. Because I think that's.
Did I say reading program? I don't think I said reading.
The terminology of literacy program keeps getting used in this conversation. And I think if an LEA hears literacy program or early literacy program, they're going to think of a program of books and curriculum, and that's not what this is. So I just want to make sure that we're distinguishing between professional learning around early literacy, the science of early literacy, and early literacy programs. They're really two separate things. So I just want us to all be on the same page about that.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Board Member Hanson.
Thanks, Chair. I'd speak in favor of the amendment just for two reasons. One, I don't particularly like vendor bills, especially when it looks like an expensive program. And two, the study that Board Member Moss referenced, the Department of Education has their What Works clearinghouse. I just reviewed that again. And the finding, this is back in 2008, was that providing second grade teachers reading instruction training using the letters curriculum with or without the instructional coaches did not increase the reading test scores of their students. So I understand that now this seems to be really widely accepted and a lot of people are using it. But that's a reputable study that said, hey, it didn't work. So I'd like to leave the LEAs some flexibility in making their own decisions on that.
Okay. Oh, my screen just jumped again. Oh, no, it's jumping back. Now I'm not seeing any hands. Just one sec. I'm bringing my screen back so I can view who has their hands raised. Dr. Dixon, your hand's still raised, and then we'll go to Vice Chair Belknap.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure who asked this question to, but opening this door to several different vendors how will this money be distributed? How equitability for districts? If a bunch of them want letters and then one wants this, how will we distribute the funding?
Dr. Thompson?
Given this is a new idea, here's my initial thoughts to that. It would be, we had a set standard per teacher in terms of the cost per teacher for letters. We would keep that same cost per teacher for whatever model of professional learning that the LEA may request, and that would be the money available per teacher in the LEA. So it's not dependent on the professional learning, but the budget was built around this particular one, but it could be used similarly for a different one.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised except yours still, Vice Chair Belknap, but oh, there it goes. Okay, the motion before the board is that the board approve the use of Esr II state reserve funds to support the statewide K-3 early literacy projects. Let me go back to this, sorry. The motion for the board approves the use of the Esr II state reserve funds. Oh, you guys have it out. Hey, thank you for putting it on the screen. I'm sitting there writing through all my notes here, or trying to figure it out. Okay, the motion before the board is that the board approves the use of Esr II state reserve to support statewide K-3 professional learning literacy project to improve the science of reading. Would that be your motion? I've got a thumbs up. That's a yes. So I'll restate it because we'll be voting on it. And Dr. Thronson, your hand's still raised? You have a question? Okay. All right. We're going to be voting on this. The motion before the board approve the use of Esr II state reserve to support statewide K-3 professional learning literacy projects to improve the science of reading. Board members at this time, please vote.
Point of order, Chair.
Yes.
Are we going to speak to the motion?
Oh. I thought we were after it was stated and seconded. You know what? I'll call back. I'm going to rescind my direction there to vote. Discussion to the motion. Vice Chair Davis.
It was really just a question. Are all things the same in the rest of the proposal besides this change to allow if an LEA chooses some kind of training product other than letters, they can choose that training product, but are all of the other pieces of this proposal the same, like the psychologists get trained and the timeline in the groups and all of that? Do all of the rest stay the same?
On the operations side, Director Thronson, can you answer that question, please?
Absolutely. Yes, in terms of the timeline, we'd give them 2 years. The same staff we would want trained for the same reasons they were identified here. So I don't see needing to make any significant revisions. It's just taking kind of this one choice to allowing for more flexible choice and a kind of sieving that down into the proposal. But the key elements can remain the same with this shift.
Thank you.
Okay, speaking to the motion, Board Member Straight.
Yes, I have a question. So if a district said, well, we're going to take the money and we'll do it in-house, is that a possibility? And does it still hold the same requirements as far as hours and things like that?
Director or Dr. Thompson?
Yes, thank you. So it would be based on their model. So if they were going to do something in-house, that we would need to know what evidence-based research curriculum or materials that they'd be leaning on, as this is obviously a space that there has been a lot of body of literature built around. And so it would just be monitoring that, and then they could develop the frequency. There are standards for professional learning that have impact. One of those is it needs to be at least 45 hours of instructional time to have impact. Hence 8 days of letters has that metric of what research has shown is effective. The other part would be the job embedded coaching supports that are required. That's one of the reasons the coaches are required to attend, is so that they can go and support teachers back in the classroom. So if an LEA has coaches, it'd be expected that their coaches would be trained and expected to follow up on what's being learned and support those teachers in changing practice, as well as their leaders would be part of the training, so that leaders would know what they're expecting their teachers to do and able to inspect and also give feedback and support to teachers. So very similar model and practices, but the LEAs could describe how their approach would address those issues.
Yeah, so there would be accountability. Okay, thank you.
And before I call him, I'm not seeing any other questions, but I just want to recognize just a couple of things. I was wanting to comment on this earlier, but I wanted to wait till all the board members had plenty of opportunity to express themselves. But in the space of disruptive learning, we talked about the gaps and everything. As I've reached out and I stay in contact with local boards, superintendents, and that, and I'm asking them constantly, okay, hey, you've got some new money. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And some have been very proactive on after school, getting geared up, following the most programs example, the way it was put together. They bring that up, so there's after school learning. But their biggest thing is that they really want is this professional learning. So I want to applaud staff for going within their organization and bringing us forward, because not all as we go down into the local boards, they're searching. So thank you. And as I read this proposal, I thought it was pretty much a slam dunk. But I do understand. I do understand the need. Okay, we've got to make sure we have flexibility for our LEAs. But I'm just going to be super curious. I'm in support of this. Super curious to get the findings of how many LEAs go away from what appears to be this vendor system, because they've constantly wanted it. They just couldn't come up with justification to afford it. So I'm really anxious to see how that plays out. So I appreciate the motion, and I'm going to be in support of it. Board Member Booth, and thank you, staff. Board Member Booth.
I'm just wondering, Chair, if based on this last round of discussion, if we need to consider using the words evidence-based projects, because there are lots of things you could be doing in an individual LEA that may not be evidence-based. And I'm a very strong proponent of making sure that what we're doing is not just a great program, but that we've got the data and the evidence coming back at us to support the continuum of learning.
So and maybe Jennifer can, or Dr. Thronson can respond to it. I think the way the motion and the intent of the motion was that evidence-based is still part of that criteria, but I'll let her speak to that.
100%, it better be. We just don't, to invest this kind of dollars into something that doesn't have a solid evidence base would be a waste of federal funds as well as just state resources. So we will keep that requirement in terms of, that's why letters was chosen, is because of the evidence base. I mean, we have a broad evidence base in Mississippi as a student population of a whole state that was transformed by having this kind of learning opportunity. And so yes, 100%.
Okay. Board Member Klein, and then we have Board Member Lear on that. Board Member Klein. You look froze on my screen. Not hearing you. Can I go to Board Member Lear, and then we'll come back to you? Board Member Lear.
Well, it just struck me, I'm always a I'm always the local control kind of person consistently, I might add. But it did strike me that if there are a variety of programs used, it's going to make for more monitoring, more follow-up by these very capable people. And so we've kind of got a challenge here where we're trying to offer something that the state can report on. It doesn't make for a lot of work by LEAs. Now we're switching to something that will make necessarily, if we care about them following the requirements, some more monitoring work for LEAs. And it's not really a question, because I think it's a given that there will have to be more data collection by Jennifer's staff and others for a variety of programs. So I just think it's important to point out we sometimes have to have increased monitoring if we want more local control. And I think that's something we're choosing to live with if we really are local control people.
Okay. Well, thank you. Board Member Klein, your hand's still raised. Can you join us, or we haven't submitted all these?
Okay. Yes, my question was just back to the study that was cited earlier, I think by Jim and repeated by Steve, about the letters program itself not showing any improvement in the study, or when they did the testing, and they didn't see any improvement on the reading scores from it. So does that count as evidence-based? I don't know anything about the letters program myself, but it's, on one hand, Jennifer Thronson is saying that, it transformed a whole state. On the other hand, there's this study. So what counts as evidence-based? What is the criteria for that?
Dr. Thronson or Sarah, either one of you?
Yes, we would use the ESA evidence-based requirements of what it means to be evidence-based as part of those criteria. So there's 4 levels of evidence. There's promising, there's different levels of evidence, and they would need to fall into one of those to be qualified as an evidence-based program. And for one study, we have to keep in mind, you can find any program and any professional learning experience out there, you can find one study that shows no results. We were very clear on the Hill on this particular issue, is that not 5% of teachers will change their practice without coaching and support. 95% change when they have coaching and support. And that is the difference of this program, is embedding that job embedded coaching and support into the system, not just delivering professional learning, because there is a body of research that shows just providing teachers with knowledge doesn't change their practice. It's the supports they receive back in the building that are really essential. So that study does not surprise me in any way. And letters has been updated. We are on the 3rd edition. That would have been the 1st edition in 2008.
Member Earl, and then it will be Member Moss. Member Earl.
I'll try to be quick. I know that, because I went to their website and looked at their information, and they're out of a specific state. So they are from Mississippi. It's not like it was a national entity that, was everywhere. So they are from Mississippi. We don't, and I wanted to compare our data to theirs, which you can't compare because they have different assessments. So when they say, they improved all of Mississippi, well, that's awesome. I don't know what the teachers were getting in Mississippi to start with versus what Utah teachers had. So the fairness here is that we need to make sure there's follow-up, right? Whatever program that we're using to, not program, but professional learning, that it's training in that science that we know works, whether it's, letters or whatever it is. And that's the point here, is that there's many evidence-based pieces out there, but it's the follow-up, right, that is making it impactful. And so that's what's important here. And then, yeah.
Okay. Board Member Moss.
Just briefly to clarify, I think, that study, it's a bit old, things change, and I didn't mean my reference to that to suggest that this program cannot be very successful or that it hasn't evolved. It suggests to me, though, that, it's a bit complicated and suggests the opportunity for flexibility. And And that was, you know, one point in time where it was taken as a pretty good look, a pretty scholarly look at it. And at that time and in that place, you know, didn't find much success. I understand there has been success elsewhere. So I don't want that comment to, you know, challenge what our staff has determined. But I think where we're heading here is better in the idea that, you know, there are sometimes mixed results, and I would hope LEAs can do their own assessment, evidence-based review, and say, okay, that's had some success some places, but we'd like this. So thank you. I just didn't want my comments to be misinterpreted, but I do think it suggests the need for flexibility.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other hands raised to speak to the motion. I believe we understand how this proposal is put together and where the evidence based up, et cetera, was in that. So I'm going to restate the motion, and let's vote. The motion before the board is that the board approve the use of Esr Ii State Reserve to support statewide K-3 professional learning literacy projects to improve the science of reading. All those in favor, please vote. The voting is complete. The motion passes, and there was one no vote. Is that how you saw it, Vice Chair Belknap?
Yes, Board Member Cannon.
On the no. Okay, the motion passes. Okay, we are to item 7, which is our lunch break. Wow, it's afternoon. I forgot about lunch. I'm sorry, but we'll have a late lunch here. So board members, at this time, it is 1:26. Let's start promptly at in a half hour. So let's try to be about 2 or 3 minutes before 2, and we'll get back